I discovered my wife's infidelity on a Tuesday, which feels important somehow. Not a dramatic Friday when emotions run high, or a somber Sunday when existential dread is already part of the brunch menu. Just an ordinary Tuesday in February, the kind of day that has no business upending someone's life. My name is Daniel Mercer, and until 2:47 p.m. on that particular Tuesday, I would have described myself as a happily married architectural engineer living in Tampa, Florida. At 2:48 p.m., I became something else entirely. A man holding his wife's unlocked iPad, staring at a conversation that had no business existing in a world where our marriage vows still meant anything. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself with thunderclaps and dramatic lighting. It arrives quietly, often disguised as something mundane. In my case, it arrived because Sarah had asked me to check if her flight to Nashville had been delayed while she was in the shower. Nashville, where her marketing firm was hosting a 3-day conference. Nashville, which I now understand was a destination, but not for the reasons I'd been told. Her iPad chimed with an incoming message just as I was checking the airline app. The notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. A digital interloper bearing the most casual of apocalypses. Can't wait to feel you against me again. Hotel confirmation attached. Same room as last time. The sender was listed simply as J. Not a name I recognized from her colleagues or friends. Just a single letter, as if the alphabet itself had conspired against me. I should mention here that I'm not the kind of husband who snoops. Sarah and I have been married 9 years, the kind of relationship where passwords are shared not out of obligation, but because it's simply more convenient when someone needs to check a flight status or order takeout. There was an innocence to this access, a trust as comfortable as old furniture. But there I was, my thumb hovering over that notification, caught in a moment of ethical calculus. Open it and violate her privacy, or ignore it and violate my own. Emerging suspicion? I tapped the message. What followed was a cascade of poor decisions that any reasonable person would attribute to temporary insanity, but I prefer to think of as an archaeological dig through the ruins of my marriage. I didn't just read that message thread, I read all of them. 2 months of exchanges between my wife and someone named Jason, documented with the meticulous care of people who thought they were being careful but had no idea what real caution looked like. There were the expected elements, the suggestive phrases, the logistical planning of their encounters, the post-meeting dispatches tinged with the satisfaction of shared secrets. But what gutted me more were the ordinary moments, the daily check-ins, the inside jokes, the mundane details that form the scaffolding of genuine intimacy. Thinking about that ridiculous bird outside your window this morning. Just had the coffee you recommended. You were right. Life-changing. Meeting with clients today. Wearing the earrings. Our secret. These weren't just the exchanges of physical affair. This was the architecture of a parallel emotional life, built brick by digital brick, while I remained oblivious in my own home, sleeping beside the general contractor of my undoing. I heard the shower stop. 4 minutes until Sarah would emerge, wrapped in her blue towel, hair twisted up in that effortless way that had always looked like a small miracle to me. 4 minutes to decide what kind of man I was going to be in this new, fractured timeline. I closed the messages, opened the airline app as originally requested, and placed the iPad exactly where I'd found it. Then I sat on the edge of our bed. California. King, purchased 3 years ago as an anniversary present to ourselves, and waited, my hands folded in my lap like a schoolboy preparing to recite a difficult lesson. Any delays? Sarah called from the bathroom, the casual domestic question of someone whose world wasn't currently bifurcating. On time, I replied, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. Boarding at 5:15, she emerged exactly as I'd pictured, blue towel and twisted hair, the familiar scene now playing like poorly dubbed foreign film. The movements familiar, but the meaning distorted. "You okay?" she asked, pausing in the bathroom doorway. "You look pale." "Just a headache," I said, manufacturing a smile that felt like origami folded with wet paper. "Staring at blueprints all day. She nodded, accepting this perfectly plausible explanation, and continued her pre-trip routine. The efficient packing, the checklist consultation, the light but strategic makeup application. I watched her hands move with practiced precision, these same hands that had apparently been touching someone named Jason with equal expertise. That night, I drove her to Tampa International, maintaining our usual pre-trip banter with the performance of a lifetime. I kissed her goodbye at the security checkpoint, the casual peck of a husband who expects to see his wife in 3 days, not the desperate clutch of a man who suspects everything is ending. "Love you," she said, rolling her carry-on toward the TSA line. "Love you too," I replied, a statement that remained true despite everything, which was perhaps the most brutal part of the entire situation. I didn't confront her immediately. This surprises people when I tell this story, as if immediate confrontation is the only honorable response to infidelity. But there's something to be said for taking time to process nuclear-grade emotional fallout before deciding which buttons to push. Instead, I spent those 3 days conducting my own covert operation. It turns out that once you know what you're looking for, evidence of a double life isn't particularly well hidden. It's like those 3D posters from the 90s. Once you see the hidden image, you can't unsee it. First, I checked our shared cloud storage, finding a folder labeled Nashville Presentations that contained not PowerPoint decks but photos. None explicit, thankfully, but intimate nonetheless. Jason had a face now. Early 40s. Athletic build. The kind of symmetrical features that make men like me quietly resentful in elevators and waiting rooms. Next came the credit card statements, where I discovered a pattern of charges at a restaurant in Ybor City called Mano's every second Thursday for the past 3 months. Not our usual haunts. Not anywhere Sarah had ever mentioned going. Then their communication methods. A separate email account I found logged in on her laptop, plus the messaging app they used that automatically deleted conversations after a set period. A digital burn after reading, system that had failed only because Jason had apparently adjusted his settings differently than Sarah. By day 3, I had constructed a comprehensive timeline of their relationship, which appeared to have begun at a marketing conference in Atlanta 5 months ago. 5 months during which I had planned our summer vacation to the Outer Banks, helped Sarah's mother move into her new condo in Sarasota, and started preliminary designs for the home renovation we'd been discussing since last year. 5 months of living in a marriage that for me was continuing on its expected trajectory, while Sarah had quietly constructed an exit ramp I hadn't noticed. When her flight landed on Friday evening, I wasn't at the airport to meet her. Instead, I was sitting at our kitchen island, a glass of bourbon in hand, my third, if we're being honest, though I'd paced them carefully, with a neatly organized folder containing what I'd come to think of as the evidence. The initial confusion on her face when she Ubered home to find my car in the driveway, but no greeting at the door, shifted to concern when she saw me at the kitchen island, then to something more complex when she registered the folder, the bourbon, and the fact that I hadn't said hello. "What's going on?" she asked, setting down her suitcase with deliberate care, like someone approaching a wild animal they're not sure is injured or aggressive. "Nashville seems nice this time of year," I said, aiming for casual but landing somewhere between sarcastic and unhinged. "How was the conference?" "Fine. Productive." Her eyes never left the folder. "Daniel, what is this?" "Funny thing about Nashville," I continued, taking another sip of bourbon. "According to your airline app, your flight arrived on time. According to your hotel's website, you never checked in." The color drained from her face with such dramatic efficiency that, in other circumstances, I might have been concerned for her health. "I can explain," she said, a phrase so cliché that under different circumstances I might have laughed. "I'm sure you can," I replied. People who maintain elaborate deceptions usually have explanations at the ready. The question is whether any explanation matters at this point. I opened the folder and removed the first page, a printout of their initial messages after the Atlanta conference, where the groundwork for their affair was established with the careful enthusiasm of people discovering an unexpected connection. "Jason seems nice," I said, sliding the paper across the island toward her. Very attentive. Good taste in coffee. Sarah didn't touch the paper. She remained standing, one hand still on her suitcase handle as if calculating whether she should just wheel it back out the door. How long have you known? She asked finally. Since Tuesday. But apparently I'm the last to know since this, I gestured to the folder, has been going on for 5 months. 5 months. Saying it aloud made it simultaneously more real and more absurd. 5 months is a college semester. 5 months is a Florida winter. 5 months is long enough to grow a decent tomato plant from seed to fruit. 5 months of deception requires sustained effort and commitment, the very qualities I thought were being invested in our marriage. It's not what you think, she said, another line so expected I nearly checked off a box on an imaginary infidelity bingo card. Isn't it? I felt something shift in me then, a move from shock to a strange detached anger. Because what I think is that you've been sleeping with someone named Jason while telling me you're at conferences or working late. What I think is that you have a whole separate digital life that required significant effort to maintain. What I think is that our entire reality for the past 5 months has been a carefully curated fiction. That's not fair, she whispered. Fair? The word came out as a laugh. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when I spent 3 days assembling evidence of my wife's infidelity like a deranged prosecutor? Was it fair when I realized our life together wasn't just damaged but possibly fictional? Is it fair that I'll now question every business trip, every late meeting, every casual mention of a colleague for the foreseeable future, assuming there is a foreseeable future for us? She flinched at this, the first acknowledgement that our marriage might not survive this revelation. Then, with a resigned sigh, she finally released the suitcase handle and moved to sit at the kitchen island, though she chose the stool furthest from me. You weren't supposed to find out like this, she said. Was there a preferred method? I asked. A PowerPoint presentation, perhaps? A formal letter of intent to betray? That's not what I meant. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. A 1-carat oval diamond set in rose gold, selected after weeks of research because I wanted it to be both classic and unique, like her. I meant I was going to end it. With Jason. When? I asked, genuinely curious about the timeline in which she had planned to reconstruct our marriage. Soon. She glanced up, meeting my eyes for the first time since she'd entered the kitchen. This weekend, actually, in Nashville. So there was a conference? Yes. Jason. He works for one of our client companies. We were both scheduled to attend. I was going to tell him it was over. I considered this, swirling the remaining bourbon in my glass. And what prompted this sudden attack of conscience? Guilt? Fear of discovery? A better offer? The cruelty of this last suggestion wasn't like me, but then again, nothing about this situation was familiar territory. Because I love you, she said simply. Because 5 months of whatever this was with Jason made me realize what I was risking, what I was throwing away. I wanted to believe her. God help me, sitting there with irrefutable evidence of her. Betrayal spread between us like the world's most depressing charcuterie board. I still wanted to believe that she loved me enough to choose me, without the pressure of discovery. But love isn't just a feeling. It's a series of choices made daily. And for 5 months, Sarah had been choosing someone else. You realize the timing of this revelation is convenient, I said. If I hadn't found out, would you really have ended things with him? Yes, she insisted, leaning forward. I had already booked a separate hotel room in Nashville. I wasn't going to stay with him. The plan was to meet, explain that it was over, and then actually attend the conference. Alone. I raised an eyebrow. And I'm supposed to believe this because it's the truth. Her voice cracked slightly. And because you know me, Daniel. Better than anyone. Better than Jason ever could. You know when I'm lying. That was the problem, though. I thought I had known her. Now I wondered if the woman I had built a life with was just one facet of a person who contained multitudes I'd never glimpsed. Why? I asked, the simplest and most complicated question. Why Jason? Why any of this? Sarah closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. It wasn't about you. It wasn't about anything you did or didn't do. That's what people always say, but it's never true, I countered. Affairs don't happen in a vacuum. Fine. A flash of irritation crossed her face. You want the ugly truth? I was bored, not just with you, with everything. My job, this house, this city, the whole predictable trajectory of our lives. Jason was unexpected, different, a deviation from the script, and you couldn't have mentioned this profound existential crisis to your husband. Perhaps suggested therapy or a vacation or literally any option besides infidelity. Would you have understood, really? She looked around our kitchen. The tasteful granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the carefully selected pendant lights that cast the perfect glow for both cooking and casual dining. You love this life. You love the stability, the plans, the 5-year goals. I told myself you wouldn't understand the part of me that sometimes wants to burn it all down just to see what rises from the ashes. There was some truth to this, I had to admit. I am a planner by nature and profession. I find comfort in blueprints and structural integrity. But the idea that I was somehow too rigid, too predictable to accommodate her need for spontaneity felt like an oversimplification of both my character and the complexity of our relationship. So instead of talking to me, you created a separate life, I said. A digital affair with physical meetups, all while maintaining the appearance of our marriage. That took planning, Sarah. Meticulous planning. Not exactly the impulsive act of someone desperate to escape routine. She had no answer for this, which was its own kind of answer. We sat in silence for a long moment, the kitchen that had hosted countless dinner parties and lazy Sunday breakfasts now feeling like neutral territory and hostile negotiations. What happens now? She finally asked. I had been asking myself the same question for 3 days. What does happen after the foundation of your marriage reveals hairline fractures you never noticed? Do you demolish the whole structure or attempt repairs, knowing the integrity has been compromised? I don't know, I admitted. I'm not making any decisions tonight. Are you asking me to leave? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. If she left now, it would create a physical separation to match the emotional one already established. It would signal a break, possibly permanent. If she stayed, we would enter the unbearable intimacy of cohabiting through crisis. No, I said finally. But I'm taking the guest room. I need space to think. She nodded, accepting this small mercy with visible relief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I warned. I haven't decided anything. I just know I can't have this conversation until I've processed everything. The next week passed in a bizarre facsimile of our normal routine. We moved around each other with careful politeness, like diplomatic representatives from formerly friendly nations, now in the midst of tense negotiations. Sarah went to work. I went to my office. We ate meals separately. We avoided the bedroom at the same time. Meanwhile, I oscillated between rage, despair, and an odd, detached curiosity about how our particular story would end. I consulted a therapist, then a divorce attorney, then the therapist again, covering all possible outcomes with the thoroughness. That defines my professional approach to structural challenges. Sarah, for her part, gave me space while making her position clear. She wanted to repair our marriage. She ended things with Jason, permanently and publicly, ensuring I knew it was done by literally calling him while I was in earshot, explaining the situation, and requesting no further contact. She scheduled appointments with a marriage counselor, leaving the information on the kitchen counter should I decide to join her. Most significantly, she wrote me a letter. Not a text, not an email, but an actual handwritten 12-page document that began with, "Dear Daniel," and ended with, "I will fight for us, even if I don't deserve another chance." In between was the most honest communication we'd had in possibly our entire relationship. She detailed her dissatisfaction not as an excuse but as context. She acknowledged the selfishness and calculation of her actions. She expressed genuine remorse not just for the affair, but for the breach of trust, the elaborate deception, the fundamental disrespect inherent in creating a parallel life. The letter sat on my desk in the home office for 2 days before I finally read it. When I did, I found myself doing something unexpected, fact-checking her timeline against the evidence I'd gathered, looking not for further deception, but for alignment, for truth, for some indication that the woman who wrote this raw confession was the same woman I had married and could possibly still trust. On day 9 of our strange domestic Cold War, Sarah left for work, and I made a decision. I called my most significant client and asked for a week's extension on our current project. I contacted the marriage counselor and confirmed our first appointment. I texted my brother in Orlando, who had been providing long-distance emotional support through cryptic conversations. Sarah and I had agreed not to share our situation with local friends until we determined our path forward. And then I did something, either incredibly wise or phenomenally stupid. I logged into Sarah's iPad again, this time with her full knowledge and permission, established during one of our brief, stilted conversations about transparency going forward. I wasn't looking for more evidence of her affair. I was looking for signs of the woman I had married, the person who existed before and possibly alongside the version who had chosen deception. I found her, scattered throughout the digital artifacts of our shared life, in photo albums of our vacations where her smile reached her eyes in a way that couldn't be faked, in notes she'd written for work presentations where she'd doodled our initials in the margins during boring conference calls, in a private journal entry from just 6 weeks ago where she'd written, "I don't know how to stop this mess I've created. Daniel deserves better. I want to be better." The complexity of human relationships is that they resist simple narratives. The truth isn't that Sarah didn't love me, nor that our marriage was a lie, nor that her affair was meaningless. The truth, as I was learning, contained elements of all these possibilities existing, simultaneously, like Schrödinger's relationship, both broken and whole until observed closely. That night when Sarah came home, I was sitting at the kitchen island again, but without the bourbon and evidence folder. Instead, I had 2 plates, a home-cooked meal, and a single question. Do you want to try to rebuild this? Not what we had before, because that's gone, but something new that acknowledges what's happened and somehow moves forward. She set down her bag carefully, studying my face with an intensity that reminded me of our early dating days, when every expression was a new territory to explore. "Yes," she said simply. "More than anything. It might not work," I warned. "I might not be able to get past this." "I know," she nodded. "But I want to try. I want to be someone worthy of your trust again, even if it takes years." I gestured to the plate across from me. "Then let's start with dinner. And tomorrow, we have an appointment at 2 p.m. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It wasn't even a promise of eventual reconciliation. It was simply an acknowledgement that endings and beginnings often look remarkably similar when you're standing directly at the fulcrum point. As we ate, maintaining a conversation that carefully avoided both excessive casualness and dramatic intensity, I realized that regardless of how our particular story ended, I'd already learned something essential. That love, like architecture, requires both solid foundations and regular maintenance, and that sometimes, when structural damage occurs, the only option is to shore up what remains while rebuilding with materials strong enough to withstand future storms. Whether Sarah and I would successfully rebuild or ultimately decide to carefully dismantle what remained of our marriage was still uncertain. But sitting across from her in our kitchen, watching her navigate this fragile new reality with determination and genuine remorse, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that some structures, despite significant damage, can be not just repaired but reimagined into something stronger than before. Only time would tell if we were capable of such ambitious reconstruction. For now, we were simply 2 people sharing a meal. acknowledging that the hardest work of our relationship lay ahead, should we choose to attempt it together. Well, that escalated quickly, didn't it? Let me know whose side you're on in the comments. Hit that like button, subscribe, and buckle up. More wild, messy, and oh-so-relatable stories are on the way.